Hi, everybody, and welcome. I'm Danny Lichtenfeld, Director of the Brattleboro Museum and Art Center. It's my pleasure to be your host for tonight's conversation with artists Mishel Valenton and Benedict Scheuer and curator Maria Stabio. This event tonight is being presented in connection with the exhibition Personal Nature, which features artwork by Mishel and Benedict and was curated by Maria. And it's on view here at the Brattleboro Museum through October 19th. You can read more about the exhibition and see installation photos on our website, brattleboromuseum.org. At the end of tonight's presentation, we will do a Q&A. The artists and Maria will happily respond to your questions and comments at that time rather than throughout the presentation. But if you'd like to submit a comment or a question, you can do that anytime. If you're here via Zoom, please just use the Q&A button on your screen and you can type in your question or comment. If you're watching on Facebook Live, just type your question there and we'll keep an eye on that as well. And again, you can enter your comments or questions at any time, but we'll wait until the end to get into them. Okay, to get things started, the way this is going to work is first Maria's going to come on and talk a bit, and then she's going to hand it off to Benedict, and then to Mishel, and then we'll all come back on for the Q&A. So at this point, I'd like to ask curator Maria Stabio to join me on screen. Hi, Maria.
Hi.
Thanks for doing.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I just said thanks for doing this.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm excited to talk more about the show and to introduce both artists, Benedict and Mishel. And I also, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. You go ahead.
Oh, well, are you finished or
Yeah, I was just, I didn't know if you had something else you wanted me to be on screen for, but if not, I'm gonna just go behind the scenes now and hand it over to you.
Okay, sounds great.
Okay.
Yes.
In a bit.
So I also just wanted to say thank you to Sarah Freeman, Director of Exhibitions, for inviting me to curate this exhibition. And I also definitely appreciate Danny and all of the help that you've been able to offer, both for getting this conversation ready and then also at the museum itself. So before I introduce both artists, I just wanted to share a little bit about my personal background. I'm a painter and an artist. I'm originally from San Francisco, California, and I now live in rural Pennsylvania. I'm about an hour away from Allentown. So I don't typically curate, and so when I am asked to curate a show, it's a very special and unique opportunity for me. One of my personal goals as an artist is to promote the visibility of Filipino culture and Filipino artists. And so from the outset, I felt very strongly that I wanted to have this show include two Filipino American artists. And I also obviously wanted them to be artistically compatible as well. So those were some of the criteria I was looking for. And I found out about Mishel and Benedict through this really amazing publication called the Filipino American Artist Directory. And this was printed back in 2019. And so this was a way for me to find out about other artists across the entire country that I was unfamiliar with and learn more about their work. And a lot of us connected on Instagram. And I found out through Instagram that many artists that I knew, including Benedict and Mishel, were also connected with other artists that I knew. So there was actually quite a network of people that we were all kind of connected by very few degrees. And so with that being said, I just wanted to read the statement that I wrote for the show. And then I'm also going to share some installation images from the show. And I would really encourage everybody to go see the exhibition if you have not already seen it. And I think you'll really be surprised and happy that you did, because this work is incredible. And it's also even more incredible when you see it in person versus online or the internet. So with that said, I'm going to share my screen. So this should be hopefully working. And all right. So this dual exhibition unites the artists Mishel Valenton and Benedict Scheuer, who are bound by a shared passion for using drawing and painting to capture the ephemeral essence of personal and natural experiences. While their work originates from an ethos of introspective curiosity and sometimes flirts stylistically, each artist possesses their own solidly established pictorial vocabulary. Valenton takes the viewer on a profound contemplative journey into a visual diary of her momentary needs and desires. Her paintings reflect her intimate emotional landscape. She embraces vulnerability, expressing hunger, sadness, scheming, hopefulness, and other facets of the human experience. Whatever feeling or desire I'm inhabiting in that place where I have a brush in my hand, that's what I'm painting, she writes. This approach feels the most free right now and unburdened by externalities. There is no need for the work to be anything but a moment in time. The female portrait or figure is of me or not of me, a possibility of self, the memory of someone else's face or mine's or no one's. I don't know exactly, but it doesn't matter either. Valenton's fluid approach to self-expression becomes a form of therapeutic healing, a celebration of the ever-changing nature of life's experiences. Scheuer's drawings are primarily inspired by his garden, nature, belonging, and interconnectedness. His work emerges through an improvisational dance with the artistic process. This begins with stretching the silks that are his painting surface and mixing resists, which present ink absorption and are used to mask areas of silk that Scheuer does not want to be colored. He writes, I get the studio ready, I meditate, then I work. Scheuer is not aiming for a particular direction or expression. I find that what is depicted and the spirit with which it's conveyed, color, shape, quality of line, shifts from day to day. Scheuer's drawings and silk pieces in particular embody that fluidity. They echo the delicate dance between the artist's painterly mark and the air, literally flowing with each subtle breeze and blurring the lines between artistic object and the surrounding environment. Both Valenton and Scheuer's work celebrate the freedom found in sensory recognition, the gratification derived from the immediacy of expression, and delight in all sensations, visual and tactile. So I hope you enjoyed that statement and the work that we were able to show via these installation views. And I would like to hand it over to Benedict, who will speak first on his work.
Cool. Thank you, Maria. Yeah, I guess before I get started, I just wanted to say thank you to Maria for bringing Michelle and I together in this awesome project, and also everyone at the Brattleboro Museum. It's been an absolute pleasure working with everybody. I am going to share my screen and get to it. Okay. So, yeah, again, thank you everyone for being here and taking an interest in our exhibition. Today, I'm going to focus on my practice currently, but also please understand that I consider myself interdisciplinary, so I'm often working in things outside of drawing, which is what I'll be talking about today. So everything from writing, video, performance, sculpture likes to find its way in there as well. And yeah, within the space of drawing today, I'm going to talk about my process with silk, and then also my philosophies as a maker. And then you'll see throughout the presentation too, there'll be a little blue star in the top left corner of some slides, and those are indicating that that particular piece is currently on view at the museum. So everything else is kind of just things that I pulled to help kind of bring the presentation together. So here is a picture of my studio. It's in the garage, and it's subject to a lot of fluctuations in temperature and things like that, which actually affect how the material behaves. So if it's very humid, things don't dry as quickly, and things have a tendency to bleed more or somewhat like that. And so I like working in the garage. It's a very dirty space, which I think is fun in the context of the fact that I'm working with silk, which is such a luxurious material. And so it's kind of ironic that I'm fluttering these things out of there. I also like that I can open the garage door and extend my studio out into the driveway between the garden that's just down the way. I can hear birds, cars, wind. There's mice in there. The other day, a chipmunk ran over my foot. Yeah, typically what I'll do is I'll get things stretched, as you see in this image there. Those stretchers are fashioned from PVC pipe, and the silk is held in place with binder clips that are attached to stretchy hair ties to keep tension. Okay, so once stretched, I draw on the silk using resist, and the consistency of resist is somewhat like Elmer's glue or like cake icing, and I squeeze it out of a little applicator bottle. And you can see in that image there, there's all these lines of white, and that's where the resist has been applied. And sometimes I'll add color dye to those to make the lines darker or to add color to them. But often I'll use it white, and it will just reveal the white nature of the silk that's underneath. When it hardens, it halts and blocks the flow of dye, which allows for a clean partitioning and intentional application with color, which is, and so, yeah. And that once the dye is applied, which is done via paintbrushes typically, it starts to bleed. And I often apply a lot more than is necessary and intentionally try to erode lines away to allow this bleed to happen between forms. And I really relate this back to the liquid exchange and connection of all living things. When a silk's been completed, I let it dry totally for about 24 hours, and then I get it prepared for steaming. To steam the work, I lay down multiple layers of newsprint, which you can see in that photo there. And I carefully roll the silks into a tube. And the paper functions to prevent the silk from bleeding while it's being steamed. And so the other reason that it needs to be rolled up so nicely is because if there is any wrinkling or anything like that, when it goes into the steamer, things get permanently creased. Okay. And so here are the silks all rolled up in a nice little tube. They're placed into a little fabric bag. And then there's a little dowel or stick that I put through the top that's used to hang it into my steamer. And so here you can see is my very, very fancy steamer, very DIY. It's made out of ventilation tubing and some insulation. It has a Martha Stewart Living like pot on the bottom that I got from the thrift store, and there's a little hot plate down there. And so I boil water in that pot, and temperatures reach to about 200 degrees. A lid goes on top, and the silk just hangs and dangles in the center of there. And I like to think of this as sort of like this moment of crystallization, metamorphosis, and it really becomes the heart of my studio. I turn it on at the start of my studio day, and things steam for a few hours. And usually by the time things are done, I'm wrapping up whatever I'm working on for that day. And whatever I worked on that day will go into the steamer the next day, and that cycle just continues. During this 2-hour steam, the dye actually goes through molecular fusion with the silk protein, and they become permanently bonded and color fast. And so this process of bonding the dye to the silk is unlike a standard drawing or painting where layers are placed on top of each other. Instead, with the silk drawing, everything exists as one cohesive object. And it's like an ecosystem, it's a single plane, and that's one of the things that I really like about silk in particular. And so here you can see how the silk is hung, the little lid on the bottom corner. And it's hung like this because you just don't want the silk as it's steaming to touch the sides of the tube. Otherwise, water will kind of leach in and it can impact the final image. And so once they're steamed, the silks are washed. I used to do that in a machine, but have since now switched to doing it by hand to have a bit of more of a delicate touch. Things are then ironed, which has been a headache for years of me trying to get that down in a way that felt solid. So it's required a lot of patience, but I'm there. And yeah, so it's washed, ironed. After that, all the excess dye and resist has been totally swept out of it. So it's just returns to its original luster and lightness. And it's back to moving as silk would, which is just with the breeze. If you walk past it, the silks will move with you. If you are really close and you breathe on it, it'll flutter. And so for me, they really remind me and bring me back to myself in a really special way. And so that's ultimately how my silk process happens. And I wanted to start with that before now just digging into what I'm thinking about and what I'm working with in terms of sort of this like spiritual center of the work that I do. So just as a little starter, I was born and raised in northern Minnesota and spent a lot of time outside. And I think that's really impacted my work today. And I was actually just visiting family in Ely, Minnesota, which is like tip top of Minnesota last week in what used to be my grandparents' home. My dad lives there now as my grandparents have passed. And while there, I was really thinking a lot about what it was like to be a kid and spending a lot of time there during the summer. And for me, when I wasn't swimming in the lake, I was often running around in the garden or in the woods looking for insects or picking raspberries in the garden, things like that. And in this little drawing here, which is of ink on paper, you can see this nude figure sort of lounging. There's floral plants around, and at their feet, at the bottom of the image, you can see like a little trickle of ants that are kind of swarming at the bottom, and the figure is just watching them. And I think that was a lot like me when I was little. I was just wearing more clothes. And so woven between all this time outside was a lot of time that I spent in the art room of my grandparents' basement, where I'd spend hours drawing, building things out of paper and cardboard, and then running upstairs to present these creations as offerings to different family members. And this image on here is not from that time. It's I made this last year, and I wanted to make that distinction because I was sharing this presentation as a practice run. So it's like, you might want to say that. So this is some of my current work. But anyways, those days were really blissful. And I've been really, I think, ever since then, kind of seeking that out. And so today I'm seeking out this same sort of rhythm and balance that I had while growing up. I'm trying to balance life's obligations to essentially carve out a lifestyle where I can work in my garden and then head over to the studio. The only difference is that as an adult, I take to the garden and my studio with an intention of spirituality that's rooted in mindfulness. And perhaps the mindfulness that I'm searching for is the mindfulness that I naturally had as a child. And I don't think that that's too far off of an idea. And here's little old me walking in the Minnesota winter with my family. So I guess everyone has their own idea perhaps of what mindfulness is. And so I thought it'd be helpful to give my own definition. And personally, I view mindfulness as a gratitude and attention to sensation. So an attention to my breathing as it carries forward what I see, hear, smell, think, imagine or witness, the things that are happening in me are just as important as what's happening outside, as they're all kind of one thing in my mind anyways. Sometimes I believe really big, mystical, fantastical ideas about drawing. And so in my drawing doctrine of sorts, a line is understood as highly sensitive. Drawing a line is the condensing of sensation from the environment and my body into an enduring mark. And from this perspective, I advocate for drawing as an overlooked miracle, deeply profound in its capacity to hold the energy of maker and environment within it, like the marrow inside a really juicy bone. And I like to think that this is possibly similar to the experience that one might have when they hear the song of a bird. And that song is sort of carried into the chest or into the mind, and it's intermingling with the body. And then what would happen if you were to draw from that space, to literally draw that energy or feeling, whatever you want to call it, out onto a surface? And that's what I'm ultimately trying to do, a little bit more abstractly than this image might suggest. And yeah, just to see if it can contain that unique and special energy. And while it's difficult to know for sure if that's even possible, for me, it's a much sweeter life to believe it is possible. It's a kinder life. And so I try to honor this sensitivity, and I like to meditate before I draw. Oftentimes, I carry this meditation over into repetitious lines. And so you can see the lines that are repeating in the wings of this bird that's on the screen. But that repetition carries over into a lot of things: the wings of my birds, angels, the way borders are drawn, the way plants kind of repeat their leaves going up. And so that has sort of unintentionally become a part of the things that I like to draw. And serendipitously, when I see an image of mine or approach a work of art of mine like this bird, I really begin to see them accidentally interpreted as lungs. And so I'm approaching this thing, it's about as big as my wingspan. And to me, it's like my lungs that have been expanded out of my body, and pattern has been added to them, in color. As each line grows with the arc of my body, I sometimes feel my brain and state of mind experiencing this electric and powerful feeling that runs through my entire body. And it's usually for just a second. It's like a blip, 1 or 2 seconds, and I just like catch it as I'm drawing that line, as if I'm totally tapped into this antenna of a line, and there's like a conduit or something happening. And when that happens, I feel this intense joy that feels powerful and mysterious, and often results in this big grin on my face. Sometimes this energy is calm, but most often it's really energetic and powerful. And maybe this is what one of my drawings could taste like to somebody who has a spiritual relationship to looking, a sensory connection to the work that I'm making. Because my practice is spiritual, I used to put a lot of pressure on myself to work in a very specific way. I was always thinking about the ideal studio practice as one that oozed with grace and calm. It was almost like I was trying to become a saint, someone who modeled some level of divine perfection. This pressure arose, I think it arose because I believe that art was inherently spiritual at its core. And this is sort of a new thought that I'm kind of testing out, but yeah, that art was inherently spiritual at its core. And with this sort of belief, I then began to believe that there was a correct way of being that meant learning to control and curve myself into this perfect vessel for creation. And this was really agonizing. Art has been such a joy for me, but it's also been the most agonizing, excruciating thing that I've attached my life to. And I think it's because it is a spiritual practice that this has happened. But I think that there's a new way for me to look at what it means to have a spiritual practice that exists. And the new one that I have is, or the new distinction that I've come to for myself very recently, is that rather than being inherently spiritual, my drawing practice is spiritual because I have chosen it to be so. So spirituality is more like an intention as opposed to an essence. And through that small change in perspective, I feel like the studio has become much wider, much kinder, because I really just have to be myself. And the self that I am is kind of the opposite of what I had been idealizing. I think the best description for who I am when I'm in this studio, often, not always, is a little goblin who is madly delighted by color, form, shape, and line, and I'm making decisions really fast, and I'm second guessing absolutely nothing. And I'm allowing myself to work upon gut feeling, instinct, and pleasure in quick and dense succession. And it is an absolute rush for me, and it feels so good. Working on silk in the manner and style that I work in is a big challenge, which kind of makes it fun. Erasing is not possible, and every mark is a permanent one. The silk itself is often wobbling, especially when I'm working at scales larger than myself. Like the PVC pipe is bending back and forth, and I'm like trying to like tap into that rhythm of the motion of it. Dyes are bleeding, resist is dripping down, and I'm often working under a pressure of time. I'm trying to complete the piece before sections have been allowed to dry, as I want each area to have the ability to bleed into the area that's adjacent to it, which isn't possible in the same way when things have dried up. So under all these pressures, it could be desirable to seek a level of perfection in craft that requires this discipline of grace and calm. However, my guts take me the opposite route, and I think that's one of my greatest assets. So yeah, on June 30th, very recently, 2024, I wrote the following in my journal. Art and making is not inherently spiritual. To invest in art spiritually is a choice to practice in the possibility that artistic creation is as mysterious and profound as our existence. That art and one's own existence are simultaneously vital to each other and therefore to everything. Humbling to understand that this is true and possible for anything that we may choose with clarity of heart and love at the intake and the output. Emotional understanding, relationships, gardening, washing the dishes, growing, looking at the sunset, petting the cat as she purrs. And yeah, that sums up my little section of the talk. I have my contact information here for anyone who's interested. My website, I have a little newsletter that comes out every once in a while. If you want to keep up to date with me, you can also follow me on Instagram. If you have questions that aren't answered in the Q&A later in this talk, you can always email them to me at the email listed there. If you're interested in collecting work, email me as well. Yeah, and that pretty much sums up my portion of the talk. Thank you everyone for listening. I'm excited to hear what Mishel has in store for us. And so I'm going to pass the baton off to her.
Thank you, Benedict. And that was a beautiful talk. Thank you for sharing all of that. Let me then share my screen. Okay, and you should see my website. And I'm just going to briefly go over, actually, before I go into that, let me just introduce myself a little. Hi, my name is Mishel Valenton. I am a Filipino-American artist. I live in Richmond, Virginia. I was born in Manila, Philippines, and moved to the US in my early 20s. And I received my bachelor's degree in art at the University of the Philippines. So before I go into personal nature, let me just go over some of the past works that I've done to give more context to how personal nature came about. Okay, so I have here works from different years, and I'm going to go to 2013, 2014 at first. So in 2013, I had started this Etsy store called Erpagita Prints. And before that, I had been doing figurative paintings, but nothing really stuck. I was struggling a lot with painting. And when I had started this store, I felt like I found a piece of my work that I could really hold on to, which was color. And from doing these works, I felt that color was the way that I could move a work forward. And this was maybe something that I did for around 2 years. It was mostly commercial work. I worked as a service designer. And I think after 2 years, I felt like I had said everything that I wanted to say with Erpagita. It started off as like representation of the spiritual, of the idea of oneness. But then I'm always drawn to the figurative as well. So once Erpagita kind of wrapped up, I wanted to go back to figurative painting. So from 2015 to around 2016, I went back to oil paintings. And as you can see, there's still a strong influence of pattern in these paintings. And there's still this sense of rigidity, but also that treatment of color that had continued to stay within my work. And then from 2017 to 2019, during this time, I experienced this significant loss of a relationship in my life that affected my art practice. Whereas before I would paint solitary figures, it kind of moved me in the direction of painting more narrative scenes of families, friends that are spending time with each other. Anything that represented joy or sunshine to me, I felt like I wanted to draw it into my life, and painting became a means to try to have it. So it was from that space that I had been painting from for several years after that experience. And same with 2019. So these are paintings from a show called Hot Tropic, which was my solo show at Sense Gallery in DC. This was more about the ups and downs of a relationship that I was in at the time. Like this, for example, was my symbol for love, which is also like the elephant in the room. It's kind of like an unspoken love. There were a lot of facets to that relationship that I would dwell on, such as wanting to be seen and to see the other person. And so those experiences kind of went into this series. And then moving on to 2020. So I went back to portraits. So drawing for me for the longest time was a challenge. I felt a level of comfort with color, but drawing was still something that I wanted to get comfortable with. And with this series, I wanted to see how far I can push the figure. Like, can I create something the same time that I'm destroying something? Like, how far can I pull things apart, but then try to bring it back together to it being a portrait? And then in 2021, this is a series of digital works. And when I was making my paintings for the 2019 show, for that solo show, I did these digital sketches and I would transfer them onto oil paintings. And there was something in that process that I felt was lost in translation. the energy of the sketch would kind of dissipate once I try to transfer it. So it made sense to me that, okay, if the work exists better as something digital, then let it exist that way. And there's also something to be said about how expansive the color range is with digital. And it's still something that I'm trying to look for in physical mediums. Also during this time, I was experiencing some health issues. Like I had gotten like really like bad, like serious eczema. And this is one of the works that I did that I made about that. And it's just that feeling of not being well. And so the digital works, which I did on my iPad, was kind of very welcome to me as part of my art practice, because I could do it even when I didn't have the energy to do anything else. Okay, and finally, personal nature. So I have works on paper for the show as well as oil paintings. The first batch of works I did are the works on paper, and then I did them mostly in 2023. And again, I think I wanted to get to a level of comfort with drawing and with the line, because with painting, it gives you a lot of leeway for change and for correction. But with paper, it's completely different. Like once you commit a mark, it's very hard to remove it. So I've chosen, I think, maybe 13 drawings for this show, and maybe in total there were like around 50, but these are the ones that had the most cohesion and they spoke to each other the most. And as Maria said, I just wanted these to capture the moment in time and whatever it was that I was feeling in that moment. And it could be exhaustion or anger, stress, worry. And I didn't attach any judgment towards these feelings. And what's also valuable for me is that when I have that emotion, it just comes out much more clear once it's committed to paper. Like the next few steps is just intuition and no second guessing. These two, for example, knife eyes and taray. So taray is a Filipino term. It kind of means being haughty or maybe mean, but it's sort of something that's ascribed to maybe women. And I remember with these two drawings, I think I had just had a fight with my partner, and I had that feeling so clearly. And the image of these two drawings just came to my mind, like fully fleshed out. And when I started drawing it, took maybe around 15 minutes. And I love that feeling when the feeling is so pronounced in me that the image is finished even before I commit it to paper. And there's no questioning each decision, because some of the other drawings, I could really work on it for maybe 30 minutes and feel like it's not finished, and then I have to sleep on it. I have to like give it more time to breathe. But with these, it just came through with a swiftness, which I really do like. I also notice in making these works that I had painted a lot of girls lying down. And I didn't set out to do that at the beginning, but realized it later on, like, why am I painting so many girls lying down? And then, oh, I think I'm tired. I think I try to paint after work or in the weekends when I have time. And maybe I really should be resting or something. So that was like a funny realization to me. And at first I thought, oh my God, I think I want to blame capitalism. But yeah, it's just a thought. But I feel like this is probably something that a lot of people experience as well, being overworked, possibly. Just the fact of modern life. And so after the works on paper, I started the oil paintings in 2024. And a lot of the reason why I had switched from paper to oil is I did want to work on oil early on, but I didn't have the space for it. So once I had moved into a larger studio that allowed me to work on oil, that's when I had begun working on them. And the treatment or the initial idea with the oil paintings is similar to the works on paper in that the first sketch is of a feeling and whatever emotion it is that I'm feeling at the moment. But just by the nature of oil paintings, because they do take more time, there's more leeway for it to change. So with this one in particular, I knew I painted a girl lying down. And then I thought, okay, what is she doing lying down? Is she just staring at the ceiling? Like, I don't want to stare at the ceiling. Like, what do I want to do when I'm lying in bed? Oh, I want to watch TV. But the TV doesn't fit. Oh, okay, maybe an iPad. But how will the iPad just float in the air? Oh, maybe someone can hold it. So it was completely an afterthought, this part here. But I do want the paintings to show my humor as well. If it does come through, like, I welcome it. And watching Sunset season 1 through 6 is a reference to a show that I like to watch. And then the second oil painting was Tender Greens. Again, I think I was in a situation where I had felt slighted by someone. So there's this feeling of being knocked down and wanting to get revenge. It's a little dramatic, but not real revenge, maybe just in my mind. And I had drawn her first this way, and then wanting her to hold maybe a knife in her left hand. But then as the days went by, I felt I can't really hold on to this negative feeling that much. And whatever it was that was bothering me had already passed. So it became maybe grass, maybe some flowers that she's holding in a garden. And tender just refers to the tenderness of maybe sensitivity, maybe her feelings. And then the last one. Okay, so I don't have a complete photo of this painting, but it's called Salampak. So it's this painting. And salampak is a Filipino term that means to hurl something with force onto the ground or another surface. And for this painting, I'm referring to the bed, to hurl one's body onto the bed. And I like the term salampak because the way you pronounce it has its own sound that sounds like a thud or whatever the sound is when you throw yourself onto something. And again, it's a girl lying down and on her phone, which is what I do like to do when the first thing in the morning, just or on my days off, if I have that luxury of time, just be in bed and scroll. And there's a particular treatment with color here that I really try to push also. And it speaks to how I've treated color in past works, and I just love color. And I think that's it for all the works for the show. Again, I love this show just because of the personal, and the through line to most of my work has been the personal. And thank you to Maria, Benedict, and everyone at Brattleboro. And I think that's it for my part. And we are ready for the Q&A.
Oh my goodness, you guys. This has been like the most joyous 40 minutes or whatever it's been. You're all such amazing communicators about your work. I'm really just taken aback, and it's been so interesting and such a pleasure to listen to you talking about your work. Thank you so much. I'm going to invite our audience out there at this time to submit questions or comments, if you have any, into the Q&A box, and we'll work through those. I have a few things queued up here to get us started. And Maria, can you say a little bit more about your thought to connect Benedict and Mishel in this show, and also now after having heard them both talk, show and talk more about their work, if there are other thoughts you have about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think as an artist, I really do feel like the way that I connect artists when I'm thinking about a curation is first and foremost formally. I mean, I really personally also love color, and so I think that naturally I was a fan of their work just based on that alone, and was visually very attracted to it. And then I think there's also this very strong connection that both artists have with drawing, and I think that that wasn't necessarily something that I actually did think of Mishel more as a painter, but now I think that this show, the two of you really do have this strong relationship to drawing in your work, but then also together in the show, there's a lot of like drawing that I think brings you two together, drawing practice that brings you together. And I think that surprisingly to me, when I saw the show come together, for the first time it was ever hung, it really just hit me right in the face how much your colors just completely were so in sync with each other. And that was really completely by happenstance. I mean, that was not planned, because I really didn't know, Mishel, what work you were going to make for the show. And Benedict, a lot of your work was already finished, but it wasn't like you two were looking at each other's images or anything. So I think that in a lot of ways that was just a coincidental thing, but I do think that from the outset I was also thinking about color, and I felt like you two would have a good color relationship. And so it just actually just worked out even better than I could have imagined. So I think formally those are the two things I was thinking about. But then I think the more that I started to talk to both of you about your work, there was this expression of like, it's really just about, for both of you, starting off with this momentary kind of read on how one feels. And then I think the spirituality aspects and the kind of like focusing on one's expression, that just became more and more evident over time. And so I really felt like that was the way to go with that curatorial statement. And I guess, I don't know, those are, I mean, I'm just stunned by how well it worked out in a lot of ways, because it turned out better than I could have ever imagined. But yeah, that's the basis, I guess, of what I was
Yeah.
thinking.
Well, and I, you know, on behalf of the museum, we're so grateful and so thrilled with the show. Benedict and Michelle, is there anything that you're inclined to say about the experience of being paired up together in this show?
There's no one that I could have chosen better than Benedict. Like, I've also been a fan of his work. I love his colors. And that whole slideshow it was just cool, gorgeous work.
Yeah, I've been a big fan of Michelle's work as well, so it's been very mutual. And I think, yeah, just thinking about color, like I didn't really know what the experience was going to be like to walk into the gallery for the first time and seeing everything hung up. And it was really exciting. It felt, I don't know, I think Michelle's work has like such like a depth and radiance of color that is so beautiful. And when you were talking about in your presentation the digital element of the range of color and trying to hit onto that, I was like, I think you're doing it. Like but I remember this one moment, there's this one sort of in the very center of like if you start when you enter the space and you look to the left and then you kind of do a sweep across, like in the center of that sweep, there's this like beautiful moment where like all of those works are like intermingling in color, and there's like this almost like big pulse that like fills the room, and it felt so good to see that, and I was so excited. So yeah, it really came together really beautifully, and yeah, I don't know, I was just excited to be showing with Michelle because I'm obsessed with the portraits especially.
Nice. So one of the audience members says, it's interesting that both artists here are drawn to making work that emphasizes permanent mark making or an inability to undo or cover up. I'm wondering what feelings that evokes in them, an intensity or risk. Maybe it feels more relaxed, raw, honest, or something altogether different.
Oh, I can answer. I'm terrified. Terrified. Even more so before, like I would avoid drawing because I felt like I made so many mistakes. I would make still to this day, I still make a lot of mistakes. So, but my comfort level with the mistakes has gone up. So it is beautiful when you are in sync with what it is that you are making, when you know exactly what the next steps are. But yeah, I personally had to get comfortable with it.
And
Yeah.
what appealed, there's something must have driven you to like you get over the terror. What is it that really like was calling to you about doing that kind of work?
I think I just want to get over that fear. I
Yeah.
want to be able to draw comfortably with confidence.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think I relate to a lot of what Michelle is saying. And to kind of answer the second question first, I think that, oh gosh, that just thought just like totally zoomed out of my head. I'll start the first question first. Basically, I feel like when I enter the studio, there's a moment of like kind of coming into the work and you get a sense of how you feel that day. You're like, oh, like I'm over worrying about this. I've like built up what I'm going to be doing in my head too much. Like it feels like I put too much almost importance or value into this. And then I like am like trying to just let that go. And sometimes it doesn't happen, or and the work just comes out bad, and it's just the way that it is. And then when you do sink into it though, it feels so good. It's like you're not second guessing, you're not doubting, you're just like tapped in and you're just rolling through and you're not even thinking, and it feels amazing. And I wouldn't say that I necessarily chose to work in mediums that are like have these more permanent mark making at the forefront. But maybe it is just related to the fact that I really just I guess I've never really been a fan of like erasing or doing anything over or like being very calculated about like a mark, like hate rulers. Like if I don't have to use one, I never will. And but yeah, I guess yeah, it's exciting when everything falls into place and it feels good. And I think I'm just in love with that feeling. So
I think
And
you answered the second part of the question, which was what feeling does that evoke in you? I'm sorry, Maria, go ahead, please.
Oh, God. I have nothing else to add, but
Somebody was, and maybe it was Michelle.
I was gonna say I cannot draw a straight line to save my life.
who needs them?
Yeah.
I have a couple other questions and comments here. A handful, well, I want to share a comment about each of your work, and then there are a few process-related questions. First of all, Michelle, I love that you blame capitalism for some of your drawings. I feel like that might be one of the most beautiful things that capitalism has yielded is is drawings. And Benedict, I was trying to write down as you were right after you said it, your definition of mindfulness, because it really spoke to me. I know it started with gratitude,
Okay.
and I
Yeah, I would say mindfulness for me is just a gratitude and attention to sensation. So it's really just experiencing the world and then being grateful for it in that moment. And for me, that's rooted in the breath first, and then everything else kind of comes and rides along that.
Yeah, really powerful. Are you up for answering a few questions that are like process related? And so, Michelle, you decided at a certain point to like work in digital, and what I heard you saying is that one of the things you really liked about that was the range of color that but I'm wondering about the rest of the experience, like physically, like how did you feel about that, you know, versus all the other mediums that you worked in?
Okay, so before I did Areopagita, I was working in oil paintings, but never hitting my stride, not finding what it was that I wanted to speak about. So Areopagita I did purely just to live as an artist, and it allowed me to do that for 2 years. And at that point, so I'm a big quitter. Like I quit art to do Areopagita, thinking I would never paint again. And I've done that like several times in my life. But I keep coming back to it, so I feel like I don't think it's gonna work if I quit again. I'm sorry, I think I forgot the question.
It just had to do with the physicality of working on your iPad versus, you know, with brushes and or drawing.
There were times when I really just wanted to work on digital. Like, there were periods I was sick. Areopagita was, I know, I can't remember the exact, oh, I know what it was. I tried to sell paintings, but the paintings were not good. So I tried digital, and that kind of stuck. And by stuck, I mean, it made money at the time. So there was like a financial aspect to it that kept me going. But I couldn't do it forever because the creativity in that medium kind of dried up for me, or in that particular form as abstract digital art. I said everything I needed to say and couldn't say anything more.
Sure. Yeah. Benedict, thank you for sharing all of that information and those pictures about your studio and process. That was totally fascinating. And I know visitors here to the museum have really been wondering about your work on silk. How did you come to work on silk, and that process of stretching it, was that something you developed, or is that a well-known, I may be really naive here, is that like how you do it if you're
Yeah.
working?
So I mean, I really came into the process very accidentally. Like I couldn't even really tell you why I even ordered the material. Just kind of one day showed up and I started working with it. But there are a lot of people who work in this material. I think that it's less common to see it within the contemporary art scene. But if you walk down like a like a um, a market in like in Columbus, for example, you'll definitely see people who are making silk scarves, and it's the same exact process.
I see. Okay.
And so everything that I've learned in terms of the basics, like there's tons of resources online for that. So it's nothing that I personally developed. I think that I've like tweaked things to meet my own like ideals of what's working, and it's hard to get information on working at a large scale. Like I've made pieces that are 15 feet long, which I would say probably the average person is not doing. So like that has been a lot of kind of learning on my own, and figuring out and troubleshooting. And there's always more to learn in terms of it, in terms of the craft side of it. So yeah, it's accessible, and I think you can work on a small scale or a large scale, and it's something that I've really enjoyed pushing because I can see the way there is like a sort of language, a visual language that often persists in these hobbyist groups that are utilizing this material and learning, and there's a certain language, and so I like kind of being able to break out and expand and use my own language in that space, and try to also use the material in incorrect ways by pushing the bleed, letting things drip, and letting the luxuriousness of the silk kind of be not contested, but kind of surprised by the decision making that I choose to go forward with.
Yeah, thank you. Maria, before we wrap up, is there anything that's occurred to you, or any questions that you have, or comments you want to add, or anything at all?
I don't know if I have anything to necessarily add, but I guess I would just say as a final word that I would really hope that people would come see the show in person, because I think it's really important to, experience the show as a whole. And I like what you said, Benedict, about kind of like this pulse of energy, and I feel like that was true for me as well when I saw the show for the first time. So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well, you've said part of what I was going to say now here in wrapping up. So I think that's a good place for us to end. Mishel, Benedict, Maria, thank you all so much. This has been such a wonderful conversation, which we're recording, by the way, and will be up and available through our website, brattleboromuseum.org, and on our YouTube channel within the next few days. And so those of you who are out there watching, if there are others who you think would enjoy watching the recording, please feel free to go ahead and share that. Thank you, everyone in the audience who joined us tonight. I'll echo what Maria just said, which is if you happen to be in the Brattleboro area, please do come see the show in person. We're open Wednesday through Sunday, 10 to 4. Admission is always free, and the exhibition is up through October 19th. And this is one of like 7 or 8 exhibitions that we have up right now. So there's a lot to see at the museum, and I think a lot of it speaks to each other in interesting ways. And the last thing I want to mention is that if you out there enjoyed tonight's event and would like to make a donation to the museum to support this kind of free programming, or perhaps even become a member of the museum, we would be very grateful for that. And you can do that at our website as well, brattleboromuseum.org, under support. Thank you again, all 3 of you. Thank you all who joined us tonight, and talk to you soon. Have a good night.